Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Asch. Today, we are going to dive into the exciting world of GovTech. Where is technology going for the government sector? What is the advancement of AI, which we've touched on in a couple of podcasts with LBNL recently and the California Science and Technology Council? Today, we're going to hear from an expert in the field, somebody who spends her day investigating GovTech companies and vetting them for their potential. I am joined by Rachel Stern. Thank you for joining me, Rachel.
Good to see you.
Tell me a little bit more about yourself and your background in this GovTech space.
Like any good career, fell into it, happens chance, and then turns out I loved it. I've been unable to claw my way out of the pool for 15 years. I founded a firm called InState Partners. We were a wholly owned subsidiary of a private equity firm. The way the private equity firm does investing is they work directly with state governments to create pools of capital to move social and economic needles. In doing so, they'd created a network of lobbyists across the country. My job was to take that network and make it an asset we sold to other companies. Half of my book of business was working with technology firms that had grown to the point where state and local governments were starting to take notice, and not always in a good way. Lyft, think Uber, think Zoom, think Lyft, think Square. These companies had a really technologically innovative solution governments wanted to access and control, but didn't know how to. I was going into state capitals, I was hiring lobbyists, I was building coalitions, I was working with governors' offices to create things like insurance policy that allowed private citizens to drive other private citizens in their car for cash, which didn't exist. We only had taxis. And then I started to work with early stage companies that had a product they were selling into state and local government, needed the same network of lobbyists, needed the same know-how, and didn't have the cash to pay me in a way that these technology firms did. So I started to create a deal where we would take equity for services, support them in their growth, create proactive relationships with agency heads or governor's offices, help them find product market fit across the country. It's really hard when you're an early stage startup to know where to start and know where to grow. And it was at this time in state and local government where cloud was really just starting to be used. And it was this unbelievable opportunity for sort of a winner take all mentality where these companies would transfer payments, data, websites. Now those companies are a lot of the big fish in the GovTech world, the Granicus, the Civic Plus, the OpenGovs, the Payits, where they came in and did a land grab. The market has evolved into a much more point solution oriented space because those big guys need to grow and consolidate their power in the industry. I worked with these startups, helped them scale, fell in love with working with founders. I fell in love with this sort of public-private partnership through technology. I loved working with governments to think about how they were considering growth, what they were trying to solve for, what we could really fix quickly and effectively with software. And that's where I've built my career. I went in-house at a startup for a period of time, and then last year started GovTech Ventures to really continue this momentum, both the regulatory tailwinds and the political tailwinds, but my own desire to support companies that are doing well and doing good.
Tell us a little bit more about GovTech Ventures and your focus there. Then we'll talk about some of the companies you've seen out there.
Rachel Stern works with companies at a lot of different scales. I've got a little LLC called Stern Strategies, and we work with pre-seed all the way up to Series A, Series B companies. Their needs are different. Pre-seed companies are coming in, but they don't really know what to do next. They don't necessarily have a trusted partner to say, hey, here are best practices, here are conversations you should be having. This is how you think of partnerships. This is how you think about fundraising in this space. These are the multiples. It's a guide and a strategic sounding board. Some of my later stage companies have grown and found product market fit. It's, what's next? How do we tell this story? How do we think about scaling into our next vertical? How do we think about serving multiple markets? I'm working with a couple of companies now that have federal government contracts, but are starting to think about how they break into state and local government contracts. It's a different sales cycle, a different narrative, and a repositioning of the same technology for a different buyer. I spend a lot of my time thinking about what state and local governments are interested in buying, what problems they're trying to solve, where they're putting money. I've got a small fund, GovTech Ventures, also which is going to be focused on pre-seed companies with that MVP with the first couple of clients, but really helping them scale to the opportunity of either acquisition or long-term growth.
And Rachel and I talk to some companies together where she helps advise them and set them up, and I help them sell into state and local government. She gets them ready, and I get them connected either here in the Bay Area directly or across the country through a network of lobbyists in every major metro area. As you were talking about those big companies that have scaled in that land grab, there's the old adage, if you're a CTO in government, that if you buy IBM, you'll keep your job. If you try something innovative and new, whoa, that could be risky for government. But now we're seeing in the last 10, 15 years, we're seeing government really start with new products, working with startups in some capacities to solve problems. Can you talk a little bit more about that trend from the government side?
Yeah, I think that Mother has the saying, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. I'll match your adage with adage. Pandemic accelerated the GovTech world a decade. And it was just out of sheer necessity, this reality that services delivered in person and on paper and manually, that just within a day was no longer possible. And so there was this opening of a conversation that said, how do we do more with less? How do we assume that we aren't going to have people in an office to manage this process? So how do we digitize some of these things on paper? How do we make virtual these things done that were in person? And how do we do it really quickly and securely and effectively? I would say the security part was not as big of a focus at the beginning of the pandemic, and then it became a really strong focus. I think that it became a really strong focus for governments, almost to the expense of startups. It swung where they were like, oh my God, we need innovation really fast. We have to solve these problems immediately. And like, oh my God, all this money we've put out maybe is fraudulent. It has right-sized itself, I think, in the intervening years to a slightly more open perspective for innovation and early stage companies. There's this ability to sell into cities, which can move a little bit faster and more nimbly than maybe a state that has to go through procurement. There is this feeling that you can come in slightly below procurement thresholds. Maybe they do a pilot so that they're tied up for a long period of with it that they don't find useful. There's ways of selling into government that allows them to try before they buy or not take as big of a risk as they would say on IBM, which would go through procurement. It would be a multi-year contract, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions. And I think the market has continued to evolve, and AI is a really interesting conversation right now. And I know you've hit on it before. For the first time in my career, other than opportunity zones, which is the only other time I saw government have FOMO, where government officials would be like, wait, I need an opportunity zone in my city or my state. There's this feeling of FOMO about AI. There's a feeling that they're being left behind or they're not staying innovative enough, or they could be using all these activity tools, but they don't really know where to start or how to create policy around it. And so everyone's just using ChatGPT, which is the worst possible scenario. I think we're going to see a really interesting inflection point in innovation as companies bring in more tools based in AI for these cities and states, with the caveat that I think a lot of these governments are not fully prepared to actually implement these tools. It's probably a services-based solution, although if someone could solve this technologically, I think it is the biggest market in GovTech right now. But it's going into states and cities and getting all of their data consolidated and cleaned so that it is ready for it. Because right now, things are in filing cabinet on Paul's computer in accounting, and he retired 5 years. Right? The data is everywhere. It is unreadable. It is on a bunch of different systems. It's siloed. Some of it's on paper. And we're talking about AI as a tool for them to make better decision on their data, but they don't even know where the data is. And that's just the reality of the situation. I think there's an intermediary step. It is a tremendous market opportunity to get these governments ready for AI, sort of that next iteration of GovTech acceleration.
And there's a couple of things in there I want to break down. There are closed data loops being created within that. I was talking to a large commercial brokerage firm, and they were saying they have taken all of their data and they put it into a chat GPT and their own internal Google search now for their employees. The employees say, oh my gosh, this is so effective at helping me gather nationwide, like leading information and doing it. Big companies starting to do that too, where they're dumping all of their data in law firms and other things into a closed loop system for them. Cities don't have to, counties, they don't have to be giving up their data and putting it into chat GPT. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about owning your data, keeping it confined, but making use of it.
And making use of it retroactively and forward, right? There's a lot of opportunity to learn from initiatives that we're not really doing right. Federally, state, or local, trillions of dollars went via PPP without any real stop gaps or security measures or verification. Fraud is rampant. It's no one's fault. It's because we don't have tools. It's not because it's purposeful, because government officials have decided that they want to get this into the hands of criminals. But the reality is that our systems aren't set up in a way that keeps them secure. And the risk of using a chat GPT or using a Claude is that we continue to not have access to that data and it continues to not be secure. So there's got to be this tool available that contains data, that keeps it secure, that allows governments to learn from their own choices and their opportunities, but also doesn't necessarily give that access to the greater ether.
Let's talk about security related to all this data. What do you want cities to know and companies working with cities about how to be secure, what to be thinking about?
I think that there's a spectrum of opportunity and risk, as with all things. I have seen a lot of industries be regulated too early. I think we saw this with drones and FAA, where we were all promised the drones of the future. They were going to be delivering our Amazon packages. They were going to be ahead of first responders. They were going to be able to deliver water to fires. And to a certain extent, that innovation has happened, but at a much slower pace because the FAA came in and created restrictive regulations. It didn't allow the market to grow as much as it could be in terms of its utility. That's a risk story. There's also a risk of not regulating at all and not having any policy stopgaps and not having any sort of thing that says, how do we keep our data secure? How do we keep our constituent data secure? How do we keep our learnings contained and only share the things that make sense to share to the broader narrative? That comes from working with partners that make security top of their list. I talk to a lot of startups selling AI, try to coach them into saying government isn't buying AI, they're buying the tool that AI enables from you. It has to be super secure, easy to use, and create a lot of value. Right. I don't expect government to know the security measures they have to take because that's their expertise. They're busy doing all the things we expect government to do. The private sector is developing this in real time. If you're going to be a vendor to the government and sell something with AI, one of the first things you have to do is talk about how secure your solution is and put your money where your mouth is.
That makes a lot of sense. Tidbit I would give to the companies, particularly the more startup bees in this space. When you go to government, it doesn't matter if you think your product is the hottest, sexiest, coolest thing ever. You need to be asking them, what is their problem? What is their difficulty? And then show them how you can solve it for them.
Jared, I want to get that tattooed on our foreheads. Yes. Sing it from the hills, honey. Yes, that's so important. I had a mentor once tell me he was very successful at selling into government. And I said, how do you do it? And I use this metaphor all the time, which is a lot of companies come in and they say, you look tired. Why don't you sit down in this chair that I built? Instead of coming in and saying, are you tired? Oh, you're tired. Would you like to sit down? What kind of chair would you like to sit in? Would you like to sit on a stool? Would you like to sit couch? How tall are the armrests? Are you trying to go to sleep? Are you trying to be social? You're taking them on this journey that you know where you're bringing them, but you're allowing them to cultivate a solution for themselves that they're seeking. And then you are providing that solution at the end. And it's a mutual journey, right? You're learning that they want the armrests a little bit taller than your product has, but it's this conversation where you're not a hammer in search of a nail. You're not a chair in search of someone whose legs look tired. You're someone looking around and saying, hey, are your legs tired? No? Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. We're going to go find someone that we can create a solution for a problem they know they have. There's so much on government officials' plates, and there's so much competition for daylight hours that no matter how innovative your solution is, if no one's asking for it, they don't have time for it. There are too many other things on their plate dealing with the day-to-day challenges of running a government.
Anything you could do to streamline a government official's job, companies should be looking at demonstrating to government how can you make their job a little bit easier dealing with permitting, data management, and all of that.
That's true traditionally, at least at the state and local level. What I'm seeing people utilize AI for or be hungry for AI for is as a force multiplier for limited resources. They're not actually trying to limit their existing resources. They're already too limited. It's a one-man department that has a budget and capacity for 6. It's a department of people only responding to FOIA requests that could be used literally anywhere else. This is so time and data and person intensive that you need as many people there as you on your IT team. It's finding these bottlenecks, and it's finding these people who are doing multiple people's jobs. It's a spectrum of too many people doing too simple of a job and not enough people doing the jobs that really need to be done in order to keep things functional that I think AI has the biggest opportunity in. The middle day-to-day stuff, the Salesforces, the AIs, the Facebooks, the things that aren't really needing to be, are being digitized for digitized sake or AI for AI's sake, is not really where government is focusing their time.
Let's talk about the types of products you're seeing. You travel all around the country, meeting startups, meeting big companies at tech events that want to learn more about the GovTech space. What trends do you see? What technology is coming that could solve local government solutions?
You touched on the permitting space earlier, and I've seen a lot of companies. That's a sort of low-hanging fruit for AI, right? So much of it is digital. The contractor has to go to the city, they bring the plans, someone has to physically review them, they have to check the statute. After they check the statutes, they go back to the plan, they say no, they send it back to the guy without much feedback. It's just too many touches for something that really could be simplified. I think there will be a change, certainly on a local level, to building codes, how we do permitting. I don't know if I could pick a winner in that space right now because a lot of these companies are solving different parts of the problem or different parts of the process, or maybe a consolidation of them over time or partnerships where they're solving for different pieces of the daisy chain. But I'm also seeing this really interesting influx of companies that are playing B2B to G, meaning they have a product they're selling companies who want to work with government that make that interaction with government easier. And it's not quite that sort of B2G administrative tool, but it's tools that consultants use when they sell their product in. A lot of that is around city planning and city management. How do you take digital twins of cities and make them easier to work with and a lot of that is finance management. These consultants are working with cities or states to help manage federal funding streams. The cities and states often don't have the capacity to do that themselves and stay compliant. There's almost this secondary market, companies that have mastered B2G, but are looking to acquire tools that differentiate them in their sell to government. And technology maybe has a direct to government too. And some of the most successful companies actually have both the channel partnerships and the direct government. But there is this whole new emerging industry of sort of channel partnerships as a means of being a GovTech.
Can you give an example in that space?
One of the companies in my portfolio called Ignatius just sold to OpenGov. They created a low-code platform for states to manage their federal. Let's just use an example of affordable housing. Every year, the federal government allocates a certain amount of money to states to incentivize affordable housing, low-income housing tax. flows through the states every year. But the metrics that states need to hit and measure to match whatever the federal government is trying to like change socially, the needles that they're trying to move, that shifts. And even within the state, the needles they're trying to move, whether it's supporting veteran housing, elderly housing, green housing, or rural housing, shift too. A spreadsheet is not going to capture all the nuances they need to measure in order to stay compliant to continue to receive that fund, because just the scope changes all the time. And what this company did was created basically a no-code platform where you could drag and drop, create your own measurement of the scope and evolve it to whatever you needed. It was AI queryable, and it was a great sort of data tool for these states, but really it was just replaced a spreadsheet in a much more nuanced dynamic. So they had a lot of direct sales into states to help them do this. But they also had this tremendous business consultant companies that were applying to administer those funds for the states. They were becoming the vendor of choice, but they also wanted this tool to sell to the state as part of their differentiating package when they were applying to the RFP. It was this dual use where you have one form of business where you're selling direct, the margins are high, but the revenue cycles are very long and very competitive. And then you've got this secondary go-to-market motion where you're selling B2B to G. You're selling to a business that's selling to government. You see a lot more deals. You're seeing a volume of deals that's higher because you can work with multiple consulting firms. The margins are thinner and you don't have a direct relationship with the customer. And it's great because you get revenue in the door, but it's not as sticky or necessarily as predictable as directly B2B. The companies I'm seeing that are most successful are doing both.
Talk through that example you gave. A company was acquired. Is that because the GovTech space is growing? Is it to branch into new areas? Talk a little bit about what does that mean for their customers?
I'm so excited to talk about this acquisition because it is indicative of where the GovTech market is going. Early in cloud adoption, it was a winner take all, and those companies are enormous, right? It's the Civic Pluses, the Granicus, the Tylers, the OpenGovs, and their core markets are saturated. I'm not saying they're all doing very well, but their core markets where they started is saturated because they've done so well. So there's this movement to acquire what I call point solutions, these sort of micro opportunities, whether it's technological or customer based, where they would have to do a lot of work to create it themselves, and it's easier to acquire it. And what that manifests into is some companies are getting acquired when they're medium to big. So somewhere between 5 and 15 million of ARR, 5 to 10 million of ARR. Private equity likes to play above 10 million in ARR. And there's used to be this sort of no man's land between 0 and 10 million in ARR. And now there's this really interesting M&A flywheel of 0 to 5 million in ARR, where a lot of these bigger companies are coming in to acquire other companies relatively earlier than we've seen historically, because it's less expensive to buy them. And it's just easier to continue to add to their tech stack in real time rather than waiting for these companies to get so big that they either provide competition or they are much more expensive. I'm really excited to see this opportunity between 1 million and 5 million in ARR for some of these companies to get acquired. And more than to get acquired, to have the optionality of getting acquired. A lot of these companies may choose to continue to build till 10, 15, 20 million in ARR, and that's fantastic for the industry too. But this hunger for early stage companies that have on some level of product market fit and some level of customer base, but maybe not as big, certainly as they could be, and maybe before they've raised a lot of money, is exciting and a really interesting shift in the market. What I think that means for customers is it could be mixed. It could be great. On one hand, they stop having to take as many big risks on early companies. They can then start working with these bigger, much more established companies that aren't going to be out of business in 3 years. It's the no one gets fired for IBM. No one gets fired for OpenGov or Tyler or Granicus either, right? Those companies are really well established. They've got great reputations. But it also means you're losing that sort of direct customer service and support and the upside of working with a small company, which is they are just desperate to make you happy. And they are willing to change anything in order to make you happy. And that sort of level of almost enterprise software where they can customize it and make it work directly for you. You become part of a bigger organization. And of course, you lose a little bit of that nuance because of it, but you gain security. One of the, to our point earlier about ways that these companies can de-risk is they can make their earliest customers wildly happy.
Yeah.
And those customers go tell other customers that they're wildly happy. And yeah, it's a two-man team, but man, they're fantastic. And I think that early process of just making your initial customer your evangelist is a great way for companies to grow. It is desperate to please, but in the best way possible.
But I'm actually arguing to some cities here in the East Bay who I believe should be early adopters of this technology to solve their problems. These companies do want to please them. And this is an opportunity if you're in the Bay Area on adopting these new technologies, be part of these pilots, use them to solve a solution, and let these companies then go tell your story and multiply that in other areas because they're willing to go the extra mile for you now. Your dollar value is so much greater.
I think that's absolutely right. And they're less expensive because they want to test bed with you, right? They want to come in below the procurement threshold. They want for you a pilot. I think value per dollar for startups is really high for government buyers. The risk is a little bit higher too. And that's always the case. You can either get value or you can get security. And I will be interested to see, particularly with AI, more specifically post-pandemic, there's a little bit more emphasis on the value for the dollar.
By giving us a review, write 1 or 2 sentences and give us 5 stars, or like, what are some cool things you mentioned? Planning, permitting is an area. What are some other areas that you have seen trends in new companies in the GovTech space?
There's a big emphasis on public safety right now, and I think that's been true for the last couple of years, but I think of public safety next frontier for GovTech. States are relatively digitized, cities are becoming more digitized. That go-to-market motion is relatively established. It doesn't make it easy, but they know what they're looking for. They know what the administrative tasks are. I think public safety was behind, and part of that is because there's this deep fear of security. Technology messes up, it messes up in the real world. You can't have police body cameras malfunction. You can't have the data in the criminal justice system malfunction. People's lives are at stake in public
Right.
safety. You can't have firefighters' helmet not connect to the cloud when they're in the middle of a fire. It's too scary to take the risk. It's historically been too scary to take the risk. And I think changing, particularly with AI, because one of the things that public safety has is a ton of data, a ton of paperwork. And that can be solved and learned from using AI. I'm seeing this door crack open, particularly with police departments, but some with fire departments, a FEMA application and disaster preparedness. AI will be seen as a tremendous asset for those departments and worth the risk. Or it's not being utilized in the day-to-day in the riskiest scenarios. It's being utilized in the after effects and the uphill time of paperwork and reporting required. Seeing a lot of things in public safety, both in terms of the administrative tasks, sort of digitizing and streamlining that, also in the disaster preparedness space. How do we create resilient cities? How do we plan for evacuations? How do we check things over time using drone footage to see how infrastructure is changing in real time so that we can stay ahead of some of these failures, or how brush is growing so we can stay ahead of a forest fire. It's a lot more proactive, and the after effects, the middle parts I haven't seen as much. There's a lot of hardware. I don't play in the hardware space, so I can't speak as thoughtfully about that. I know it's being developed, but I love sort of SaaS, GovTech, and sort of the befores and the afters. Seeing a lot of that.
And I would really agree in the public safety space. In fact, and I know we hear a lot about the Trump administration, whether you love them or hate them, they're doing a lot to cut government. One area where I see them increasing funding is in public safety technology and public safety, because that was an emphasis on a lot of key issues. But I see that in the next maybe 9 months from now, towards the end of 2025 and 2026, I see some big investments going into that space. And the way FEMA operates and disaster is looking like that's going to have a massive change as we record this here in the end of February of 2025. So there will have to be changes, and it's a great time to embrace new technology in that space. Any city council member, if you haven't talked to your police force, they will probably tell you their biggest part of their day is the paperwork side.
It's
And
horrible. It keeps them from doing the things we need them to do, which is keeping us safe.
get out on the street. Don't be in an office for 6 hours
Yeah.
because you arrested somebody for stealing a dress.
I think cross-jurisdictional data is really interesting too. One of challenges with public safety right now is the departments are extremely siloed. People could be searching for a suspect in different counties and those systems wouldn't talk to each other.
Yeah.
Streamline communication, streamline data, streamlined insights so that we're just not spinning our wheels as much, if that makes sense, in public safety, because there's a lot of good work to be done and being done, of course.
Yeah. And that came up around the redo of Prop 37 is people could commit a crime in one county and that's in California related to the shoplifting. They could go from one county to another and it almost made them impossible to get caught, or they can stay under the limits and do 8 thefts in one day. And now that's changing. And what Rachel's talking about is the next sort of step in that for the California cities listening in is how to manage that through data and share information in real time in a lot of ways to help investigations.
Yeah. And how do you support the people that are willing to risk their lives for the safety of their communities every day and let them do the good work that they want to be doing? We can do a lot of that through technology. And the private sector, we expect, we don't do things on paper anymore. So how can we take these things that are on paper and actually glean insights from them and save everyone? So that's a big industry I'm very bullish on and very excited to see a transformation, sort of disaster planning, disaster response. Every week we see new opportunities with AI to transform some level of system. I am keeping my powder dry to investments because I think there will be a natural consolidation as more companies throw things against the wall and you see who the winners will be. The winners are always the founders building for their government customers, building a solution and then looking for their government customers. They want to go to conferences, meet people in person and say, how can I help? It is still so much a person to person gaming, which is what I love and find so exciting about the industry, but is intimidating to a lot of other investors.
The next episode will focus on trends in education tech. Rachel, before we head out, any other key points you want to share?
It's such an exciting time in, and it's such a scary and exciting time. It feels very chaotic. It feels like it's hard to make long-term plans because it's hard to know what systems are going to look like. Whatever is happening federally and whatever is happening technologically. And so it's understandable to me that a lot of the leaders in government that I'm talking to right now feel unnerved and almost have the instinct to close off because there's so much happening around them that I just have to do the good work that I do every day. And I cannot focus on blowing up these processes right now. I just need to do the work. I would encourage them to open up a little bit because there is such interesting technology being developed right now that will allow you to do your work more efficiently, more effectively, and deliver services to your constituents in a much more meaningful way. But I can understand the instinct. I'm just over here saying, don't forget about innovation and don't close your doors to it just yet, just because everything feels a little chaotic. It's worth taking a little bit of a flyer if you can.
Define AI. What does that mean if you are a city, county, state government? What does AI mean? Put some context to that.
I think that AI at its simplest form for governments right now, what I'm hearing a lot of people, how they think about it are chatbots. How do you overlay some sort of third party system on your website that allows your constituent to interact with your data faster, more efficiently, and more accurately, theoretically? I think that if we take that concept 5 to 50 levels and we said, what is AI? It is this overlay, but it's an overlay across all of your systems, all of your data, all of your personnel, all of your challenges and opportunities. And it basically is an insight tool to make more thoughtful, efficient decisions. And I think that's the best of AI, where it's both an internal tool to see everything in one place and ask it questions and get answers on best practices and worst practices on things you've already done or are planning to do. And then it also is a tool that is front facing to your constituents for transparency into good work that government officials are already doing. It's a communication tool and an efficiency tool. I think that AI has this unbelievable opportunity. For me, the most exciting part is the queryability of the data. We have companies that aggregate data. That has been part of the cloud revolution for years. Getting your data into one place, seeing the dashboard. But this ability to ask questions of your data in a much more conversational and much more active way, I think is the transformation.
And I'll add to it that I think part of AI should be looked at from cities, counties, and state government agencies. You should be looking at how AI can solve that problem. Going back to the FOIA request example, if you have one person in that office and that's all they're doing, can that one person be doing so much else? Or are they in an office that, hey, you have 5 vacancies for in this and 2 staffers that are still there? How can this help them alleviate that job? So look at what are your problems and what AI can solve for that. Rachel Stern from GovTech Ventures, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.